Dear students, good evening. Welcome to Excellence IAS. Let us have the editorial analysis for today, that is November 1st, 2022. The first article, Amendments to the IT Rules 2021. In this, let us try to understand who are the stakeholders, what are the objectives the government intend to achieve. There are two types of objections we have to see. Yesterday we saw hyper-radicalization, hate speech. All these are happening through social media today. So the social media intermediaries have to be regulated in public interest. That is what is the government's opinion. On the other hand, citizens needs to have their freedom of speech, and social media can be seen as an avenue or a platform for expression to the citizens. And third thing is startups. So with regard to social media, many of the startups are coming within India itself. So when we see the objectives of these rules, what has been said is the constitutional rights and interests of the citizens have to be protected. These shall not be contravened by the big platforms. Big platforms shall not bulldoze that. Let us take Twitter. If all of a sudden they close down your account or block your account, probably your rights may be violated. Second is, the grievance redressal is very critical for the citizens. So the grievance redressal framework has to be strengthened. While doing all this, Indian startup ecosystem shall not get affected. So in a nutshell, what all this means? So we want to create obligations on social media intermediaries to protect the rights of the citizens, to ensure public order and safety, and also not to curb the ecosystem for startups. So let us see what are the additional obligations given on social media intermediaries. Remember, compliance. Previously, when terms and conditions are being given before you take an account, you just tick mark it and go. Now, the social media intermediaries shall become active towards improving the compliance of their users. So they have to provide rightful accounts, and also they have to be given in their own language regarding the terms and conditions. Hosting has to be responsible. So not just informing, but also has to ensure compliance with the policies which are being stated. Second is, there will be certain prohibited content. Simple example, some sexually explicit content may be present. So this prohibited content has to be removed. Reasonable efforts need to be made by these SMIs to remove the prohibited content. It means there has to be careful monitoring and watchfulness. And citizens are being given rights. And these rights have to be protected. And legal rights framework in India has to be understood by these SMIs. Fourth important point here is the 6 prohibited categories of content are being stated with regard to child pornography. Like this, 6 prohibited categories are being stated. Any complaint arises, immediately that has to be considered and that content has to be removed. And also, accessibility of its services to the citizens is very critical. What is meant by accessibility of its services? The services shall be available in the local languages, in the customs of those particular people. And every social media giant has to appoint a grievance redressal officer. So he has to acknowledge the receipt of complaint within 24 hours, and within 15 days he has to solve the complaint. And finally, the appeal over the grievance redressal officer lies to the grievance appellate committee. So this grievance appellate committee, what it has to do, it has to take forward the corrections in the decisions of the grievance redressal officers. Now let us see the challenges. Now, the rules increase the responsibility of the SMIs. What the major responsibility? It is to moderate the content. Obviously, the policing of the social media intermediaries on the user content is expected to increase. And second is increased power of SMI to challenge the freedom of speech and expression of a citizen. So in the prohibited category, they can broadly interpret the message or broadly take into consideration a hate speech definition, etc. They can curtail the freedom of speech. So more and more moderation rights are being coming up to these people. And second thing is, freedom of speech and expression can be curtailed by the SMIs. SMIs in a way becoming more powerful vis-a-vis the citizen, and government is becoming more powerful vis-a-vis the social media intermediaries. So government is going to control the SMIs SIMIs are expected to control the users. And obviously, as compliance need to be grievance redressal officers, all compliance need to be upheld by the SMIs, the compliance cost is going to be high, and publishing it in regional languages, etc., may be difficult. And finally, today, if we clearly observe, many of the companies like Facebook have established grievance redressal officers, but their work is not as expected. So acknowledgement is just sending an email. After 15 days, they say that you are being considered and no action is being taken. So let's take Google. If you write something, your application is being considered and it is not violative of the policy or something like that, a generic message they send after 15 days. So this has to be carefully monitored by the government. Sequence of implementation, EWS quota outcomes. You know the 10% reservations for the economically weaker sections. This has been discussed over here. What is this about? 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act is under the Supreme Court's Constitutional Bench review. What are the criticisms? Economic criteria is around 8 lakh rupees per candidate. 98% of the population can be brought within this range of economic criteria. So, very poor among the economically weaker sections will lose advantage because of this. Second thing is, remember 50% ceiling is being breached. And adequate representation is there as a criteria for socially, educationally backward classes. So what the Article 16 subclause 4 states that if they are inadequately represented, then only reservations has to be given. This particular clause do not exist for EWS reservations. So the adequate representation as a clause is not been mentioned when reservations are provided to EWS. So the conditions appear to be more liberal to EWS reservation compared to the SC/ST reservations. And added to that, social backwardness is the criteria for reservation today. And third thing is, it has excluded the poor from the other categories. Remember, in India, there is something called vertical grouping of reservations and horizontal grouping of reservations. What is vertical grouping? Based on the caste hierarchy, SCs, STs, OBCs. It means if you enjoy the reservation in one group, you cannot enjoy the reservation in the other group. In horizontal, let's take women reservations. So women, they may belong to SC, ST, OBC, different communities, still they can enjoy the reservations. So these are called overlapping reservations. Today, EWS is presented by the government as a vertical reservation. Vertical reservation means these are excluding other categories. The reservations are being given to the people. So that's what is the point is being stated. The poor exist across the spectrum and the poor from the other communities are not being considered. Now, if we consider them, let us take first, are they poor or not? Then what reservation they have to enjoy. This is one thing. Let us take SC reservation, ST reservation, and then let's consider the poor among them. Right? These are the two criteria. So this is making this as horizontal reservation, overlapping reservation. So this article essentially says that the policy making on how EWS has to be exercised among SC, ST, OBCs is going to get very complicated. I think many of you might not even have understood this. So that clearly says that it is complicated. And finally, the SC, ST, OBCs, how to satisfy their interests because they have more demands for reservations. That is also a major challenge. So they are asking for, especially OBCs are asking for proportional representation rather than adequate representation. It means to proportion to their size of the population, reservations have to be given rather than just adequate reservations, that is their particular demand. These points need to be considered over here. A pathway to citizenship for Indian origin Tamils. Let us try to understand. In Sri Lanka, Tamil origin Sri Lankans are there. And then in the tea plantations, especially during the British, Indian origin Tamilians are working. So Sri Lankan Tamils are there, Indian Tamils are there. So these Sri Lankan Tamils are obviously the citizens of Sri Lanka, but these are stateless. Stateless means Sri Lanka do not consider them as their citizens and India do not consider them as their citizens. So they are stateless. So in this case, there are two agreements happened. Sirimavo Shastri Pact, Sirimavo Gandhi Pact with regard to this Indian origin Tamils. But this is not being implemented. After LTTE became popular, then what happened? Many of the Sri Lankan Tamilians, they started coming into India. So Indian origin Tamils also have come to India. The biggest problem is how to differentiate these two while providing for Indian citizenship to Indian origin Tamils. That is what is the difficulty over here. And next, burden of tragedy. You know that in Morbi town in Gujarat, a bridge got collapsed. So how to avoid these kind of situations is the question over here. So what are the reasons for this? Overcrowding, lack of effective crowd control mechanisms. Especially after COVID, as the people are moving around, the rush across various pilgrimage places, tourist spots is very high. So the crowd control mechanisms are always weak in India. Recently in South Korea also the stampede led to loss of 140 lives. So that's why India has to bring in crowd control protocols in every tourist spot, pilgrimage site, and local officials need to be trained with regard to this. And fitness of the bridge is also not up to the mark as per the reports come. So responsible tourism, crowd control mechanisms, safety and environmental audits of various bridges and various stages or various facilities have to be undertaken. Safety awareness among the people is also very much important. One of the reasons for the overcrowding is people do not have the knowledge of the safety or awareness of the safety over there. So what are the recommendations we can give? The safety audit, safety awareness, responsible tourism, training of the local officials, these are critical. And next, decentralize MGNREGA. Remember, what are the problems with MGNREGA? One, most of the projects what has to be undertaken, these are being listed from the center. Rather than that, we can give that responsibility to local Gram Sabhas. They can decide the nature of the work. And what all the permissible works under MGNREGA also need to be diversified so that the amount of the work will increase. As MGNREGA is expected to continue because of the rising unemployment in COVID situations, the diversification of works can provide employment to more people. Third most important point is any kind of work, the fund disbursal has to be continuous. The center is not giving funds on time, is delaying the MGNREGA payments. So that's why a revolving fund has to be created. That is the recommendation of the committee. Finally, the payments under MGNREGA are below the market prices and this also need to be corrected. And Supreme Court to examine law depriving under trials the right to vote. So under trials are not convicted people. The trial is going on against them in a court of law. So the Representation of People's Act, Section 62, Subclause 5, prohibits right to vote of the prisoners. So it disenfranchises large population. Many of the political prisoners, civil crimes, these all people are being disenfranchised. So that's why we need to ensure that the right to vote exists for everyone. And if you come to Brazil, Lula da Silva has defeated Bolsonaro in Brazil presidential election. So why we need to remember Lula da Silva? You know this program Bolsa Familia, right? Cash transfers. This cash transfers program was first initiated by Lula da Silva in Brazil. So from there, India has adopted that particular program. So these are the things. Thank you very much.